body carries an ancestral regeneration code that determines whether you create or merely survive. While this code remains inactive, the base of your body stiffens to retain energy. The solar plexus maintains constant pressure, blocking the breath, and every impulse to create meets restraint before it becomes real presence. You wake up tired, you try to move forward, but you notice that life begins to lose traction, as if something inside locks the movement. In the next few minutes, you will apply the 7-minute ritual that activates the seed of immortality inscribed in the light bone and restores the ability to recompose before collapse. Closing this video now means losing the precise instant in which your nervous system learns to identify when it is entering chronic containment and how to restore. Regeneration before rigidity becomes a silent pattern. The light bone is not an isolated anatomical structure. It is a point of coherence where the base of the body, the breath, and the voice meet to remind the nervous system that the present can be inhabitable. When this point remains deactivated, the organism enters a state that physiology recognizes as chronic containment. A mode of functioning in which the body reduces expenditure, closes the solar plexus, shortens the breath, and hardens the pelvic base to keep life predictable on the inside. This closure happens as biological protection, but it stays active long enough to begin shaping perception, behavior, and the capacity to create. Hermetic texts and ancient Egyptian wisdom described the sacrum and the pelvic base as the altar of the temple, the point where life anchors itself before expanding upward and outward. They understood that when this altar remains covered, not from lack of faith, but from lack of inner safety, the body treats creation as risk and expansion as threat. Alchemy taught that transmutation begins at the base, in the place where earth meets fire, and that without this active foundation, no elevation is sustainable. What happens in the body when chronic containment sets in is that the autonomic nervous system begins operating closer to defense than to connection with the real. The diaphragm loses amplitude because deep breathing signals vulnerability. The solar plexus maintains constant pressure because relaxing means lowering your guard. And the pelvic base hardens because mobility in that region requires trust that the ground will support you. The more the body contracts, the more it validates the need to contract. And rigidity begins to function as a survival language that blocks the organism's ability to recompose. Research in polyvagal theory revealed that states of chronic defense alter muscle tone, posture, and the body's ability to repair tissue and cell. Stephen Porges showed that when the dorsal vagus nerve dominates, the organism enters energy conservation. And this shows up as persistent fatigue, slow digestion, shallow breathing, and difficulty sustaining presence. Studies in epigenetics indicated that containment programs can be inherited, not only learned, which means you may be carrying in the tissue a memory of defense that didn't even begin in your own story. And while that memory commands, the seed of immortality remains asleep. When regeneration stops happening, creation stops being possible. You can try to motivate yourself, organize your routine, set goals. But if the body does not authorize energy expenditure because it is still operating as if it needs to preserve itself, every project becomes effort that consumes more than it generates. Every decision meets internal resistance before it becomes action. And procrastination appears as a symptom of a nervous system that learned to economize movement. There is someone who lived exactly this pattern. Someone whose story will show how containment manifests in a concrete life and how access to the light bone reactivated the capacity to regenerate. Kimberly was 45 years old, worked as a lawyer at a mid-sized firm, and woke up every morning with the feeling that her body had already started the day before she had. The routine was functional: meetings, deadlines, cases that demanded constant mental presence, but something inside her remained in another time, as if one part of the organism were always pulling back before moving forward. She could deliver everything she needed to deliver, but every decision required a violent internal negotiation, as if the impulse to act met a subtle lock before becoming real movement. The conflict she carried had no clear name, but it had a precise address in the body. The base of her spine remained rigid, even after hours lying down. The solar plexus kept a constant pressure that made the breath stop halfway, and any personal project she tried to begin ran into a procrastination that did not come from the mind. It came from an exhaustion that preceded effort. Kimberly knew something was deeply wrong when she realized her presence had shrunk. She took up less space in conversations, avoided creating situations that asked for continuity, and felt as if life had lost traction before it truly began to happen. She had tried conventional therapy for 2 years, and although she had understood a lot about family patterns and limiting beliefs, the body kept responding the same way. She tried yoga, but realized the stretches didn't touch the deep rigidity living at the base. They only moved the surface. She experimented with guided breathing practices, and that temporarily eased the pressure in her chest, but the containment returned a few hours later, as if the nervous system didn't believe it was safe to truly relax. It was on a Saturday afternoon, after cancelling yet another commitment because her body simply had not granted authorization to leave the house, that Kimberly found among her mother's old books a handwritten notebook on Egyptian somatic practices. Her mother had attended study groups on body and consciousness in the 80s, but had never talked much about it, and Kimberly had never paid attention. In that notebook, there was a detailed drawing of the pelvic base with notes about the sacrum as the anchoring point of life, and beside it, instructions for a 7-minute ritual that reactivated what the text called the light bone, a regeneration code the body carries but forgets to access. That same night, alone in her room, Kimberly decided to apply the ritual exactly as it was described. She lay on the floor, brought her hands to the solar plexus, and began to breathe deliberately downward, not inward, observing where the body resisted. In the first minutes, nothing happened beyond what was expected, but then, at some point around the 5th or 6th long breath, she felt something yield. It was not a dramatic release. It was a minimal yielding, almost imperceptible, as if the diaphragm had finally accepted making space and the solar plexus had allowed the pressure to decrease without that meaning danger. What Kimberly began to feel in that instant is exactly what you are going to experience now in your own body. The first stage of the ritual begins with releasing the containment ring in the solar plexus, that point of constant pressure that prevents the breath from dropping and keeps the body on standby. Lie on the floor or sit with your spine supported. Bring both hands to the center of the chest, just below the sternum, and press gently as you breathe. The breath here does not go inward. It goes downward, as if you were filling the abdomen with space, not with air. And with each long exhale, observe whether the solar plexus begins to yield, whether the pressure decreases, whether something that was armed finally accepts lowering its guard. Maintain this breathing for 3 or 4 complete cycles. Slow inhale through the nose, even slower exhale through the mouth, and pay attention to what happens in the body as you breathe. Maybe the jaw is locked, so relax the temporomandibular joint deliberately. Let the teeth separate. Allow the tongue to rest on the roof of the mouth without tension. Maybe the shoulders rise during the inhale, so adjust consciously. Let them drop and move away from the ears, creating space in the cervical region. The downward breath does not happen by force. It happens by yielding. The body needs to authorize the diaphragm to gain amplitude, and that authorization comes when the nervous system realizes that relaxing does not mean losing control. Now move one hand to the lower abdomen, just above the pubic bone, and keep the other on the solar plexus. Keep breathing downward, but this time feel the movement between the 2 hands, the diaphragm descending, the abdomen expanding, the solar plexus yielding pressure. You may notice warmth arising in the region of the sternum, or a sensation of weight in the abdomen that wasn't there before, or even spontaneous yawns that indicate the vagus nerve is beginning to respond. These signs are not random. They are the body reorganizing tone and leaving defense mode. If the breath is still short or stuck, do not force depth. Instead, lengthen the exhale. Make it last twice as long as the inhale, and observe how the body reacts when you give more time for the air to leave than to enter. This simple change in proportion tells the brainstem that the environment is safe, that there is no need to keep the organism on alert, and the autonomic nervous system begins to migrate from sympathetic to parasympathetic, from containment to regeneration. Each long exhale is a somatic command that tells the body it can recompose. After a few minutes of this breathing, bring both hands to the base of the spine, in the sacrum region, and begin to apply a very gentle circular pressure, as if drawing small circles on the skin. The sacrum is the triangular bone at the base of the spinal column, and it carries information about safety, support, and the ability to sustain the body in space. When this region hardens, mobility disappears, and the body interprets rigidity as lack of ground. So even if you are lying down, the nervous system keeps operating as if you were falling. Keep the circles slow and steady, noticing where there is resistance, where the tissue feels denser or less responsive. Do not try to force opening. Just sustain the presence of the hands in that region and observe whether, over time, the sacrum begins to respond, whether the base of the spine gains micromobility, whether the breath drops even more because the body finally feels it has real support. You may notice local warming, or a spontaneous urge to adjust posture, or even a strange sensation that the floor is closer, more solid, more reliable. Before moving on to the last stage, there is something essential about Kimberly that will illuminate exactly what is happening in your body right now. Kimberly continued the ritual that night, and when she reached the stage of circular touch on the sacrum, something she did not expect happened. The rigidity that had lived at the base of her spine for years, that sensation that the pelvis was locked in a fixed position, began to yield in a way no therapy had reached before. It was not a dramatic release with crying or emotional catharsis. It was a silent reorganization, as if the body had finally received authorization to let go of a defense it had kept active for a very long time. Perhaps since adolescence, perhaps inherited from someone who came before. In the following weeks, Kimberly noticed concrete and traceable changes. Her breath began to drop naturally during the day, without conscious effort. The solar plexus stopped arming itself before each decision, and the pelvic base began to respond with subtle mobility that restored a sense of axis. Projects she had delayed for months began to move forward without that violent internal negotiation, and she noticed that procrastination had decreased because the body was no longer treating creation as dangerous energy expenditure. The seed of immortality the ritual activated was not a promise to live forever. It was the recovered ability to recompose before entering collapse, to regenerate continuously instead of accumulating wear until breaking. What Kimberly felt in that first inner yielding, that moment when the diaphragm gained space and the solar plexus yielded pressure, is exactly what your body is beginning to authorize now. Now comes the third and final stage of the ritual. The continuous low vocalization that stimulates the vagus nerve and seals the internal reorganization. Return to sitting or remain lying down. Place one hand on the sternum and the other on the abdomen. Inhale deeply through the nose, and as you exhale, emit a low, long, sustained sound, something between an or a low R that vibrates in the chest and trunk. The sound does not need to be loud. It needs to be felt. The vibration should pass through the sternum, descend to the solar plexus, reach the abdomen, and reverberate at the base of the spine. Repeat this vocalization for 3 or 4 cycles and observe how the body responds. Maybe you notice the voice comes out lower than usual, or that the vibration causes immediate relaxation in the jaw and neck, or that the abdomen yields even more during the sound. This technique operates directly on the brainstem, stimulating vagal pathways associated with active calm and presence, and the sound functions as a bridge between conscious breath and autonomic reorganization, something that happens without needing mental control. The integration among the 3 stages is what makes the ritual potent. The downward breath releases containment in the solar plexus and restores space to the diaphragm. The circular touch on the sacrum reactivates micromobility and restores the sensation of support. And the low vocalization seals internal coherence by stimulating the vagus nerve and reorganizing the tone of the entire trunk. When these 3 practices operate together, the body leaves the state of chronic survival and returns to the state of active regeneration, and creation stops requiring violent effort because the nervous system has finally authorized energy to circulate without being hijacked for defense maintenance. The central practice is complete, and now comes the moment to seal this experience in the body in a way you can carry and repeat whenever you need to reactivate the regeneration code. The physical marker that the transformation occurred is in the breath that finally drops beyond the solar plexus, in the warmth that persists at the base of the spine, in the jaw that softens without conscious effort, and in the sensation that the weight of the body on the floor stopped being a threat and became real support. These signs are not abstract. They are physiological, traceable, and they indicate that the autonomic nervous system migrated from a state of chronic containment to a state of active regeneration. If you perceive any of these markers now, the ancestral regeneration code inscribed in the light bone has been reactivated, and the seed of immortality the body carries has returned to operating. To anchor this new state and be able to return to it whenever you need, use the following signals. Bring one hand to the center of the sternum, press gently while you inhale deeply through the nose, and as you exhale, emit a low, deep sound, almost inaudible, that vibrates in the chest. Repeat this for 3 long breaths, and observe how the body responds immediately with yielding in the solar plexus, relaxation in the jaw, and the sensation of weight dropping to the base. This gesture takes between 30 and 60 seconds, can be done anywhere discreetly, and functions as a somatic command that reminds the nervous system that it has authorization to regenerate. When you feel in the coming days the rigidity returning at the base of the spine, the breath shortening, or the solar plexus arming itself before a decision, stop for an instant, do the signal gesture you just learned, and repeat internally the following phrase while you press the sternum and vocalize the low sound. My body authorizes regeneration. My base sustains creation. This instruction turns the video into a portable long-term tool, something you can use whenever the old pattern of containment tries to reinstall itself. And each time you apply this return protocol, the code strengthens and the ability to recompose before collapsing becomes more accessible. What was activated in the body now awaits only the final understanding of what you just recovered. What you sustain internally is not only the relief of a tension that yielded, it is the recovery of an ancestral capacity that determines whether you live creating or merely surviving. The breath that finally drops beyond the solar plexus, the warmth that persists at the base of the spine, the sensation that the ground became trustworthy again. All of this indicates that the regeneration code inscribed in the light bone has been reactivated. You did not learn a new technique. You remembered a language that was always available, but that the nervous system had forgotten how to traduce, and that remembering changes the relationship between impulse and action, between intention and presence, between creating and collapsing. This 7-minute ritual is one of the keys within a broader system of somatic wisdom that reconnects inherited memory, internal coherence, and the capacity to manifest without violence. There are other layers of this knowledge that deepen the relationship between base, voice, axis, and creation, and each of them reveals a point of deep reorganization that you recognize as true even before the mind understands. The path does not end here. It opens for those who choose to inhabit the temple instead of merely visiting it. Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." The containment you carried in the base, in the solar plexus, in the short breath, was not only defense. It was also the exact point where reorganization could happen. And the ritual you just applied transformed rigidity into passage, locking into mobility, and biological economy into active regeneration. The light did not enter from outside. It was released from within when there was finally authorization for recomposition to happen. God inscribed in human tissue the continuous capacity to regenerate before entering degradation. And that capacity is the seed of immortality revealed in this video. Not as a fanciful promise to live forever, but as a measurable ability to recompose before collapsing. Creation stops being effort and returns to being the natural consequence of a living axis when regeneration operates freely. And this ritual taught your organism to recognize when it is entering containment and how to restore flow before rigidity becomes a pattern. If this content resonated with you, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Sharing this video with someone you know carries this low pulse and this feeling of life that doesn't sustain itself allows more people to access this knowledge. And consider becoming a channel member to support the continuity of this work of integration between science and ancestral wisdom. Write in the comments, "I activate my light bone, my regeneration code awakens, and creation stops being effort." Doing this anchors the lived experience in consciousness and seals a physiological commitment to the new way of inhabiting your own organism. For those who want to continue exploring other layers of this somatic wisdom and discover other points of deep reorganization that the nervous system recognizes as true, click the video that is appearing on the screen. Chronic containment has begun to yield. The base has responded again, and the seed of immortality inscribed in you has finally been awakened, not so that you live forever, but so that you recompose before collapsing and discover that creation was always a consequence of regeneration.